Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 27. I'm Enigmius, and today the Samson build continues. By the end of this episode, you'll be able to take a look at what will represent a pretty good idea of the finished concept for the ship, even though there are things that we'll have left to do. But before we get working on that section, I mentioned in the last episode that we had this little grate on this flat section on the front, and I said that I would rework it. I had an idea to rework it, and I decided that I would show part of this process because it's a really excellent example of what I mean when I'm talking about drawing lines in pixel art format and then filling them in with blocks to make them look smooth. And that was really sort of the one takeaway that I noticed as I was doing this, and realized that, I mean, if it hadn't been clear before, this would be one excellent way of sort of illustrating that concept. But having said that, we spent a chunk of the last episode doing an outline and then doing the little vertical bits. I didn't really think that it warranted a whole additional episode just to the rework. So we give you an opportunity to see the broad strokes of what the process involved, and then once we got all of the little slats in, we go clean it up, and then we put in the light bits in between, and then I actually built it out a little bit so that the finished version looks a little bit thicker, and that was it. That was the whole process, and that was one way to detail that flat section as part of the transition in a way that looks interesting. It doesn't look neglected. And then we can move on. I mentioned, I think I've been mentioning the last couple of episodes at least, that I wanted the front section of the ship to be a little more angular. We've got this whole ship that's all about the curves. We've got basically 5 cylinders all sort of strapped together in various different ways. In order to create something with a little bit of visual interest and a little bit of contrast in themes, I wanted to have the front section a little bit more angular, and the whole design and the functional purpose of the front section, aside from being the part that we call the front, is it would be big and beefy and a very good way to protect what's behind it. If we're in a head-to-head sort of shoot-off with somebody, the chances that they're going to be able to punch a hole through the front part of this ship and start damaging the interiors are pretty slim, I would have to say, at this point. Now, I understand there are certain balancing concerns with the game. If I were to encounter, for example, a ship with torpedoes, maybe all that armor wouldn't look all that appealing anymore. Suddenly, it would be better to have shields, but I mean, it is what it is. Relatively speaking, based on what I've encountered in the game up to this point, this is a very robust design that will allow me to approach, enemy ships, even if I'm not heavily armed, and not be too concerned about the kind of damage that they're going to inflict on my ship, because there's just so freaking much armor that it's not really a concern. Before we can really focus our attention on that front section in its entirety, it's important to think about the transitions from the curved sections to this front section so that it looks, again, like it was designed on purpose and not something that was thrown together over a few sessions, and every session I had a different idea and I just never bothered to think about how they would integrate with one another. It takes a little fiddling sometimes to get things lined up, especially when it involves transitioning into other complex shapes. You can see we're trying to pull this thing down so that by the time it gets to that leading edge, it's disappeared. It's basically curved down into the hull. We have this nice smooth transition like so. I'm learning that a lot of the planning and a lot of the interesting challenge in building comes from figuring out what kind of temporary structures I need to build around the area I'm working in order to be able to make everything line up the way that I want it to. I could see in some people's estimation that that would be a very tedious and uninteresting thing to have to do. But frankly, I find it really, really interesting because it's that puzzle sort of component that you're trying to figure out. You're trying to look at what you're trying to do and what it requires and what you have to work with and what you can fit in between in order to bridge the gap and make everything happen the way that you want it to. This section here that I'm working on now was another great example of that, because I'm trying to, we've got the curve from the top down, the top of the ship down towards the front, but now we've got this other transition from the sides of this sort of bit that's extended across the top. I'm trying to make it transition into nothingness in a way that actually looks like it lines up with everything around it. It doesn't become a distraction because it seems out of place. So with that taken care of, that's the last, I think, I'm pretty sure that that's the last of the transitions that we had to do before we could focus our attention pretty much exclusively on this front section. And you can see big slabs of armor going into place so that we have that protection that we're talking about. The handling characteristics of the ship, based on the numbers that were given for the different pitch, yaw, roll, thrust, speed, all that other stuff, they seem to be holding fairly steady. They're declining as we go because we're consistently adding mass. So I'm not surprised about that, but I was concerned that they would decline faster than they have. So the fact that they're still kind of in line with what we originally had, what I was happy with, is good, because realistically speaking, once we get this front end tacked on, everything else that we add will basically be of the cosmetic variety, and we don't have to worry too much about whether or not we can make it functional. If it's not going to work, if it's going to be too much, we can just skip it. We don't have to put the cosmetic stuff on if it's going to have too much of a negative impact on the other performance characteristics of the ship. I don't expect that to be the case. The things that I have in mind for the detailing aren't going to be, I think, of the variety that take a lot of resources in order to either offset the increase to mass and how things change when you do that, or energy required for things of that nature. There was a comment posted from a previous episode, I think, not the last one, but the one before, maybe, I think, someone saying that the integrity fields might not be enough. The ones that I've got on the ship might not be enough to reach all the way back, and that's true. They're not enough currently. They extend about halfway from the front of the ship to the midway. Well, they extend from the front of the ship to about the midway point, so about half the total length of the ship is covered or incorporated within the integrity field. But there's going to be an opportunity to add more integrity field blocks before we're done. So worst case scenario, we don't add more. The front of the ship is covered with the integrity field, and that's the part that usually ends up being the most heavily damaged. But I don't expect it's going to be especially difficult to incorporate enough before the build is complete in order to have the entire ship covered with the integrity field. Because one of the things that tends to happen also that I've noticed in a fight is you are focused on one enemy ship and you're trying to destroy them, and while you're doing that, his friends are attacking you from different angles, and it doesn't really pay to shoot at one guy for a little bit and then shoot at another guy for a little bit, and then it's one of those things where if you just focus down each ship one at a time, they go down faster than if you're trying to pick them all apart. No matter what you do, when they've got you surrounded like that, no matter which direction you turn, there's always going to be someone getting you from a bad angle. So I don't want to focus all of my attention on the front end with the assumption that that's the only part of the ship that needs to be well protected. I think I've done a pretty reasonable job with the design up to this point of protecting the important details. The nacelles aren't especially heavily armored. The fact that most of the directional thrusters are in the nacelles and they're exposed kind of gives you an idea of where we're at with those. But the main section of the hull, those three sort of cylinders in the middle, pretty well armored from above and below, and also the way that we've lined things up on the back end, they've got a certain amount of protection there as well. So as I'm kind of putting things together and thinking about the functional aspects, I think we're pretty much there. Again, the integrity field obviously is something I'll be looking to adjust before we're done. But at the same time, I don't see a lot of need for much of anything else. One of the things that I did as I was building this front section, and I completely forgot to mention, is I put in a very, very large, very, very thick slab of titanium armor block for hardpoints for turrets. And basically all along that top edge on the front of the ship is going to be where you might put your turrets, and do so with confidence, knowing that the chances that the enemy is going to be able to destroy that slab and knock out your turrets pretty slim indeed. And as I recall, it's divided up, so if it does by some freakish sort of disaster end up being destroyed, it's not going to take all of your turrets with it. It might take a handful, but you don't have to worry about losing everything in one sort of fell swoop. If things go really, really badly for you, you forget to repair your ship for 3 months or something, who knows? It's something to keep in mind, but it was one of the things that I had in mind for part of this design, is making sure that we had a really, really beefy place to put the turrets so that they would be able to survive as well as or better than the way they survived on the Malapis, which actually did a really good job of keeping its turrets intact, despite the fact that the hardpoints on that ship were made out of iron and they were much, much smaller than the one that we have here. So you can see now with the front end coming together a little bit more what I meant by angular. It's not necessarily flat and knife-like. It's not like, you know, it's not that kind of angular. It's just there's no effort being made to soften the edges. Everything is, you know, big, it's beefy, it's large blocks, and they're coming together at very distinct angles that don't have a lot of transitions. And one of the things that I wanted to do, that I try to do whenever I've got a situation like this where I'm doing large, flat, sort of angular shapes, is have little extruded sections in various different places where things sort of stick out a little bit proud of their surroundings. Again, just to add a little bit of visual interest, break up the flat panels, and ultimately it keeps the build interesting for me, because it reintroduces that challenge component of trying to figure out how to line all this stuff up. It's not difficult to stack together polygons using the match feature and kind of come up with a generic sort of design. It's when we try and do those extra details, I think, that the challenge sort of creates itself. You know, you don't have to go looking for it, you just have to have an idea in your mind. I would like it to look a little bit more intricate, a little bit more interesting, and then bam, there's an extra challenge. It's great. Even if I have an idea of how I want it to look more intricate or more interesting, how exactly am I going to pull that off? And you can see I'm spending quite a bit of time in this one area, placing things, removing things, placing other things, removing other things, sliding things around, trying to see what they're going to look like if and when they fit. It's not a perfect process. One of the things that I haven't spent a lot of time with is the tools to let you just kind of place blocks that you've manually scaled. I spend so much time with the match feature on that it's a little bit easy to overlook at times this process of how exactly do you make it work when you don't have everything snapping to the face of the block next to it. So we get finally one piece that's just a little bit larger. You can see it just sticks out a little bit from its surroundings. And if we get that right, then it's pretty easy to keep that same size and translate it all the way along as many times as we need to. I was thinking of just kind of extending those down and around so it comes across the front and then scoots underneath, and you'll see I actually do that briefly before I change my mind. But one of the ideas that sort of crossed my mind is that I did what I said I was going to do in terms of making it angular and beefy and industrial looking on the front, but it still kind of looked dull. And I wasn't really satisfied that this was the best iteration that I could come up with and I didn't really have to think for very long when it came to ideas that I could use to change that up a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. So right now, I'm laying everything out and putting things in place so that I can put those extruded sections. You can see once we remove everything that was just temporary, now we've got that part that I was talking about and kind of getting everything lined up the way that I want it and thinking about how we're going to move it down and around to the underside. And then I thought, what if we just do one more section here that kind of sticks out, that distinguishes itself from the rest of the stuff around it as sort of the place where people would be concentrated who are involved in the day-to-day operations of the ship, kind of like the bridge, so to speak. So I spent a little bit of time, again, temporary structures, so that I could place the block that I wanted, the size and shape, the location, lined up with the other things, fill it in, finish the shape, kind of wrap it around the front, and what we end up with is basically the final sort of main structural profile of the front of the ship. So I said I would get the front of the ship done if I could in this episode, and I think for the most part I did. The next episode is going to be all about the details and adding things that take it from what I think is an interesting hull to an even more interesting hull. The only functional concern that I have left, like I said, is the integrity field generators. If we can get more in, which I don't expect is going to be difficult, we'll take care of that in the process of filling out the last cosmetic details, and then we'll be doing the test, the sort of evaluation, see how it operates, various different circumstances that we designed it for, and then we'll do the blueprint. So we're close. We're very, very close to offering the blueprint and being done with the build, which is always kind of exciting because that means something else will be starting not too long after. So if you want to be notified about the next episode and all those details and things that we'll be adding, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.